Today on the Hotflashing podcast, we're talking about something I don't think we discuss enough in the menopause conversation, and that is emotional fitness. This term is everything to me. I only actually heard it a few weeks ago, and I thought, oh my gosh, that's what I've been doing for 15 years, working on my emotional fitness. And I have been to every person under the sun, and I've tried everything under the sun, and I have been thinking lately, there just had to be a better way to go about this. I'm telling you all this because my guest today, Janice Taylor, seems to have found it. Janice is a tech entrepreneur, Harvard scholar, and three-time founder who is building something she calls emotional fitness intelligence. She is the creator of Wilson 4Q and AHA Healing. This global platform blends trauma-informed integration, neuroscience, AI, and immersive retreats to help people address the root causes of emotional pain. And it doesn't take 15 damn years. With more than 3 decades of research across psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, and technology, Janice is making a case that emotional fitness deserves its own category in the wellness space. And not just as a buzzword, but as a measurable, trainable skill that impacts how we heal, lead, and live. But what I'm most curious about, and what we explore in this conversation, is what emotional fitness means for women navigating the all-important midlife heroine's journey. Because if this transition is asking anything of us, it's to integrate everything we've been through so we can move forward with clarity and clear eyes. I hope you enjoy our conversation. I'm Anne-Marie McQueen, journalist and proud 50-ish woman, and we are here looking for the true truth in perimenopause, menopause, midlife, and beyond.
Opening our minds to other possibilities is not always easy.
Hotflash Inc.
You're all woman to me. All right, Anne-Marie.
So, and I might do another one. Depends. Okay, Janice, I am so excited to talk to you about this topic.
Wow.
So welcome
Thank
to
you.
the Hot Flashing
Thank you.
podcast.
Thank you.
You just blew me away when you said emotional fitness. I know it's not a crazy out of the sky term, but it just hit me here because it's like that's what I've been striving for, and it's taken me so long. So I want to know, like, what is emotional fitness intelligence from your perspective, and how's it different from emotional intelligence?
So great. You can kind of think about, first of all, thank you for having me because we wanted to keep it simple. So, it is we've joked being Canadian, but I'm also from Saskatchewan, which is another level of like, we can't help but be in the earth. So we're just grounded. So I needed to ground these concepts in a way that would allow anyone in the world to really understand themselves better. But emotional fitness is a system. So it would be no different than physical fitness is a system. But within the physical system would be calories, for example. These are the things that you need in order to eat well, and this is what your food's made up of. Emotional intelligence is like a calorie. This is your emotional system, which is your fitness, but here's all the things that you may need in order to understand it better. That's emotional intelligence, kind of like the alphabet to language. But what we didn't have up until now, I really believe, was a clear understanding of our emotional system separate to our mental system. So you can think about your emotional system as your radar. It's the quiet, silent alarm bells that go off. It's where all of the initial things outside of yourself initially go into, feelings you may have. They start in that system and then sends like signals to all other quadrants of the self. So I always say those feelings take the elevator to the head, and then the head tries to make sense of those feelings and emotions, or it sends it and gets deposited in the physical body. And you may have problems with your throat or your back or your knee, or oftentimes we know it shows up in the stomach. So where we don't understand is where that originates from. And so I wanted to strip everything away and go right to where the emotional system is and break it down to a science level of this is our emotional system and this is how it works. And this is emotional fitness, if any of that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. Okay, so your background, I mean, psychology, philosophy, neuroscience, tech, how does that all go into creating this understanding of this system?
It's really great to sort of think about it is that, for anybody, you have all these multiple experiences. So my initial degree was in psychology. During my degree in psychology, I wanted to understand, how these other things participated. Like, what does philosophy say about ourselves? And what does religious studies say about ourselves? And I said, like, they're all kind of saying something, albeit differently. And I remember I had a professor at the time said, you disagree with like half the things we say. And I'm like, well, you're kind of missing the other person's perspective. We're missing a big piece of the puzzle. So when I started sort of that inquiry of just trying to understand even myself better in my own sort of journey, I then sort of traversed through that. And then I thought, well, while I was doing this study, I ended up in the pharmaceutical industry. And then that was a mind blowing experience because I was there as just a sales rep, but I took pharmacology and I had to take all of these accreditations. And then we had to read the studies. And then I was like, well, some of these drugs don't work on this population of the people. And I found myself doing the same thing, saying, well, it kind of works here, but it doesn't work here. And I found myself extracting this information. And in 2009, I had my two little babies. They were 5 and 2, my little girls. And everybody was over the moon about Facebook, and everyone was excited in the province of Saskatchewan. And they were like, this is amazing. And I opened up the computer and I had a shiver down my spine. And I was like, oh no, 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 no. This is going to go sideways. And I didn't know what to do about it other than I felt it. Like my intuitive sense of this was like, great, we're all adults and this is going to mess us up. But what about kids when they get into this system? So I was working in the pharmaceutical industry. I'd been there for a decade and I literally quit my job. And I said, I have to figure this out. And so I literally Googled how to make a tech company. I didn't know because Saskatchewan wasn't a hotbed of technology companies at the time.
Oh.
And I like literally Googled and up came these blogs of like how to build a tech company. And I'd quit my job. I was getting a divorce. So talking about a complete turnover. And I had these two little babies. And I was like, what do I do with all of this? And so I saw technology as another system that would ultimately impact how we saw ourselves. And that really was the nagging question of like, how do all of these different schools of thought really define who we are? And what if we come into these systems with a broken heart? How does that happen? So if kids go into the world of technology with a world that I was raised in, which I had a single mom, my dad was an addict. I'm like, what kind of trouble are they going to get in here? Like, that's all I thought. Because like I knew how much trouble we got into in real life when we had no parents, which I had no parents really from the time I was 6 years old on. So I was like, there was a lot of things that happened to me in real life. And I thought, my gosh, what's going to happen to kids? And I just viscerally felt it. And so that's how I ended up in technology, mostly because I wanted to understand how it was built, how it worked. Very much, again, just like I wanted to understand in pharmaceuticals, like I was that annoying person saying, yeah, but this doesn't really work for women. And then I'd be like, this doesn't really work when you're a kid and is hungry. So like the same sort of nagging, well, some of this works, but some of it doesn't. So what are we going to do about the stuff that doesn't? And that kind of has been my leading journey for the last 30 years.
It's not the same thing, but your reaction is the reaction I've had to like the yoga and wellness world. And I just think of like the really sort of broken person going through a divorce who knows nothing about anything, Googles yoga, and then ends up in one of these classes with a preachy teacher, with someone who doesn't understand what they're really talking about, but is saying all this woo-woo stuff. It really rubs me the wrong way. I just feel so worried about the vulnerable person ending up in the wellness yoga world.
Well, I think that so many people are on this real search to understand themselves. And this is why I dedicated my last 30 years. Even when I was running other companies, I was like a scientist on the side of my desk writing this, like, this doesn't work here. And what about this? Like it was so annoying the last 30 years, I have to say, to kind of figure this out. And this is why I came back to the emotional system, is like, we know something's missing. We know and feel like we want to get to the bottom of it. People genuinely want to feel better. And so we enter all of these things because oftentimes it's selling a magic bullet. And I'm just too practical for that. I just was like, well, it's one piece of the puzzle and it can be really helpful, but if you kind of think about all of these things, I call them sort of the leaves of the tree, and they're wonderful. Leaves are terrific, but they fall off, and you don't water leaves if the roots are dead. You don't water the leaves. You go, oh, the tree's dead. So yeah, these last leaves are there. They can be really helpful to nurture, but they're not going to get to the core root in some cases. Now, some cases they may, but they still won't really understand the emotional system for themselves. And this is where I think is the bigger conversation of how our world of wellness has been shaped from a business model perspective, but also how it's been shaped from how they dole out knowledge. And that was more of my analysis, because I again had an amazing advisor and wonderful, mentor in a professor who's now since passed away. She was exquisite. And she, I always was like, there's something missing here. And she says, well, Janice, you're never going to be a good therapist. And I said, well, thanks for that. She's like, but I think you're a theorist. And she says, I really feel like you look at theories and extract them. And so I looked at the process of, say, service delivery wellness. And service delivery wellness is in all different shapes and forms, right? You can see a life coach, you can have a breath work, you can have Reiki. You kind of look at all of the model of it, including psychologists. It's a service-based model. And because I wasn't in that world and was from technology, I could sort of analyze it differently. And I say they breadcrumb people with knowledge. And nobody heals with breadcrumbs. You need the whole damn loaf. And you need to know how to bake the loaf for yourself. You need to know how the dough works, and you need to know how yeast rises, and you need to know that. And you should be able to bake a loaf of bread yourself. But the industry is a doling industry of breadcrumbs. And so what happens is people get pieces of the puzzle, but not necessarily how to bake the whole bread themselves. And I disagreed with that.
It reminds me so much of the mainstream medical system and how you could be, this happened to me, you're wandering through a hospital going to see the gastroenterologist for your gut issues, and you're going to the endocrinologist for your thyroid issues, and you're going to the gynecologist for your hormones, and none of them are talking to each other, and something is wrong. Plus, you have the emotional stuff going on. So, yeah, this is crazy, because this is kind of what I went through for 15 years. Just, okay, now I've been going through therapy and I've learned about this, but talk therapy only goes so far. And then I read this book about attachment. That makes a lot of sense. So I feel like you're sort of cracking the code. First of all, I know someone's going to say, like, we'll get into a little bit more how you do that, but I feel like someone's going to say, but what about complex trauma cases?
Okay, that's so great that you asked that. So if you kind of think about the industry, like you have physical fitness, and you have varying degrees of physical fitness. And some people can have such poor health physically that they require a specialist, heart specialist, brain specialist, endocrinologist. But then you have this other layer. So those that have that, maybe let's just say it's 10%. But then you have 90% of the population that probably likes pizza too much and sits on the couch and Netflix too much, but kind of knows they need to eat well and they need to move. You don't need a higher level of education to understand your physical fitness. You know you need to move, and you know you need to eat, or you will die. Like at the end of the day, you kind of understand. You also know that your lungs produce oxygen. You need breath. So if you cover your mouth and your nose, you can't breathe. You don't need to be a pulmonary specialist to understand that you need breath. So that system of physical fitness is understood by the global population, regardless of your education level. Everything else stays in this, wow, I don't know, it could be, maybe, I don't know. So if you think about complex trauma, you got to think about it in the very much the same ways that a therapist, a psychologist is trained to evaluate the symptoms that may or may not be a psychopathology. So trauma can, and it does, and has been proven to be related to complex psychopathologies, borderline personality disorders, schizophrenia. You can see even levels of narcissism, and you can connect it back to trauma, depression, anxiety. You can see that there is symptoms in here that when you connect to complex trauma, which is often rare, that they will have a true disorder and they will require a psychologist. And in some cases, they will require medication. But we need to look at that from mental health as a category of wellness. So then I say, well, okay, if that's 10% of the population, which it's not, but let's just say that it is, what about the other 90%? Where do they go? So very much the same way, if you think about it from physical fitness, that's where emotional fitness comes in. And I say that the injury to the system happens without us having to measure a degree. So there is an injury to the emotional system that happens to the world's population before your 10th birthday. Some people in psychology would define it as the primal wound. And there's a lot of amazing theory around the primal wound itself, from Carl Jung to John Furman to Charles Whitfield to Abraham Maslow. Some of our greatest psychological theories were actually studying what happens to us as children during a primal wound. Now, the primal wound could be something as subtle as someone working all the time and you not seeing your dad. Maybe your dad just works and works and works and you don't really see him. And he's working hard and he's a great dad because he wants to provide for his family. It can still inflict a primal wound. But the problem is it can create symptoms throughout our lifetime that may look like mental health, but are not. And so this is where we have to really narrow it down into the emotional system. And that's what I was curious about. And this I can take from my own story. My dad was an addict when in the 80s, AA and Al-Anon was everywhere. There was every church basement had an AA on the one side and Al-Anon on the other. And that was the course of treatment. And everybody was a raging alcoholic and everybody needed to go to AA and all the spouses would go to Al-Anon. And I was a kid in the 80s. In 1983, I was 8 years old and my mom taught piano in a lot of those churches just to survive. And so I would wander into all of these rooms like, what are you doing in here? What are you doing in here? And so I'm this precocious little 8-year-old kid who ends up sitting in these rooms listening. And so over time, people were like, well, I was an at-risk youth. And I remember when I got to high school, they said I had an 85% chance of becoming an addict because my father was one. And that's what they told you. It was highly hereditary. It was highly genetic. Chances are that you were going to become one. And I just viscerally rejected that. I was like, that does not apply to me. And I certainly had all the symptoms. We were getting drunk on the weekends. We were partying like maniacs because that's what you did as Gen X kids. And I had a guidance counselor in the school spend 5 years of me from 8 to 12 trying to convince my mother and everyone that I needed to go away to rehab. And right up until the day I graduated. And I was a straight A student. I was president of the school. He was convinced. He was patently convinced that he had to save my life. And so this kind of idea that we had to fit in this bucket because I had a couple markers. I did have a couple markers. My dad was an addict and I was a party queen, for lack of a better term, but I had a couple markers. And so then I was given that label. And I thought, how dangerous. And then I thought, well, was it useful for me? Did it help me? Did it free me from the pain I was experiencing of growing up the way that I did? I asked that question in psychology. It didn't free me. It minimized me. It made me feel less than, and I rejected it. So even though I was in AA programs from 13 after school programs at the high school from 13 to 18, 5 years I was in those programs, I didn't feel any better. And that became the real question was, I could have symptoms that may look this way, but is it true? And that really became the pursuit of a lifetime for me. And this has really been, I'm 50 years old and I still can recall 8 years old, my first drink. I had my first drink at 8 at my dad's house. They poured alcohol down my throat. I was smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol fully by the time I was 10 and 11. I had been in those experiences. My dad's house was chaos. And so by the time I was 12, I stopped going there. But the court order was I had to be there. 13, I went to the high school and then I started the aftercare programs there. While I was still playing all sports, I had 2 jobs and I was also a straight A student. And so, there was so much conflicting information about growing up in that way that when I went to go to university, I was like, I got to sort this out. And I now am so grateful that I was placed in those experiences because I have a very unique perspective on how I see it now. And I feel like I've been training for this for the last 42 years, really. So yeah, so it's time.
It just feels like it's like the training wheels of the 80s and 90s, the way things were. So rudimentary, kind of. Like it feels like you were in a funnel to actually have problems.
Yeah, it was but yet now that I've done this work and wrote this theory and, completed the science and gone through the process, like I'm so grateful for how I was raised. And I had extraordinary love for my father at the end of his life. And I had extraordinary love for the experiences I went through because I was really able to extract how privileged I was to have that experience where there was all these caring people around there. without judgment as to whether it was right or wrong. And you know, at the same time, the training I had really is what's led to me being what I do now. So I can trace back every moment and see all of the data that I could extract to understand the emotional system, but also feel that I can be in a position now to speak about it. So now, you know, I've applied at Harvard. I'm at Harvard taking classes. I'm doing the graduate work. I'm doing the making my former professor, who's since passed away, very proud. I'm sure she's cheering up there, saying like, "Yay, you're going to go and become a theorist," which I don't know if I will be or not. But I'm there, and I'm because it was so important that I've dedicated my life to this. And I think now coming back to women, you know, we I believe right now are needed in the world more than ever to live in our true selves and to live in our true purpose once we get past some of these things. But I feel that there is an emergence happening for sure.
What about, okay, so I love the primal wound concept and sort of explains why some people can have really terrible things happen and be okay, and some people can have things that they wouldn't consider terrible. I know it was really hard for me to even look at my parents because I had a great childhood, right? Like it's like to go, you know, to actually look at what actually happened. I mean, I'm hearing a lot in the neuroscientists I follow about thoughts and thinking and the way you process the inputs, and that's something I'm really working on right now too. Like maybe you're healing from the wound, but you still have the thought patterns. So I'm kind of wondering, is that part of,
Yes.
Has to be.
Well, and can I just caveat with saying this? Probably most of the people that are still dictating thought and behavior are men. And so when I look at most of the neuroscientists of the world that have a lot of platforms are men. And we love them. They're very thoughtful. But there's also quite a separation between the whole body system and to the belief that they have around the thoughts of their mind and the power over the mind. And so I want to also sort of say that this is where I would probably cause friction in some ways, but try not to, is this is sort of part of the whole like history of understanding the self better. If you kind of even look at the AA world and the Al-Anon world, it was designed by evangelical men, and they wanted to make it a disease. And if they made it a disease, then it would separate them from having to deal with their feelings. And if you look at the emergence of even just, you know, that system in 1950, actually AA became out of the Great Depression. So if you look at 1930, what you had was Carl Jung and Freud, where everyone was like, no, those dudes are talking about dreams and like the subconscious and the unconscious. No. So psychology kind of was like, easy there. Emerged B.F. Skinner and behavior psychology. Just change behavior, change how you think. It's all in your behavior patterns, your conditioning. And that coincided with the Great Depression of 1930, which led into World War II. So what you had was by 1945, all these men who came back from the war and women who were holding the fort traumatized. It also coincided with prohibition, where we had alcohol, the forbidden fruit was now here. And so now this was mainstream. And so what you had was, for lack of a better term, a huge cluster F of things happening. So behavior psychology really had its day in the sun. And gone was the knowledge that we'd learned from Carl Jung and others. So then in the to the 60s, you have the emergence of California with Abraham Maslow, who was talking about this hierarchy of needs, that these needs needed to be established in order for you to adult. And if you didn't adult, you stayed in this lower combination of the pyramid, if you know about the pyramid, which was in safety and love and belonging. The top two parts of the pyramid were self-actualization. How do I know and understand myself? And then the top was to transcend the self. Well, then they were like, well, he's a hippy dippy from California. We're behavior psychologists. We're cognitive behavioral therapies. The way you think is how you are. They wanted to deny all of the things because if you look at a patriarch society as well, most of it is governed by men, and men have coveted how they think. I think, therefore I am. Yet so much of that is pure bullshit because you can't actually, in many cases, address the contents of your mind without understanding your emotional system and your primal wound. And so if men couldn't solve the primal wound or have memory of it, they would deny it existed. And so I think, therefore I am. So what you have is this tension between an imbalance. Now, if you look at the masculine traits that are very logic based in the brain, we are heavily living in a time period of lots of logic, control how you think, change your behavior, all of that. The feminine traits, which is neither male or woman, that's not what it is. The feminine traits is about trust and feeling and emotion and tapping into that intuition that we're born with, for lack of a better term, our soul, trusting, surrendering. Those are the traits. But what we have is a complete imbalance between the two. So we're still trying to hammer our prefrontal cortex to think differently. Now, this is where the science of emotional pain comes in. And this is why I had to write this theory and the theory of emotional fitness was in the primal wound that happened before your 10th birthday. Almost all of your brain functioning, apart from your prefrontal cortex, is developed. So if you were to look at the brain and see child development, you'd see how the child has sensory, how they learn music, all of the synapses in the brain and how they're connected. When you have a primal wound, it starts a system, and the system is your belief structure, which is the system of the belief structure is formed pre-linguistic, pre-language. So a child is already forming a belief about the world before they speak, And so when they experience a primal wound, which is jarring, could be something simple, but could be jarring, it separates the person into the false self and the true self, so that the true self goes into hiding, the false self comes in, and now we wrap our defense mechanisms. Well, defense mechanisms are the armor of the container of the brain that someone lives in to keep them safe. Now, it was formed before your 10th birthday in response to pain. So you may not believe this way, but you've stayed so long at the party, it works for you. Your defense mechanisms, of which there's about 7 or 8 real sort of clear defense mechanisms that people have, that's how you judge the world. So that's your prefrontal cortex that goes from your 12th to your 23rd, 24th birthday. Now you're running the world through this box of how you think about the world, and it reinforces it like cinder blocks, like concrete. So, oh, that's danger. That feels bad. So every time you have a feeling, it comes up to this box and you decide whether this feeling is good or bad. And you decide if something's going to hurt you or not. It's just a feeling, but you can't distinguish between it being love and being it's going to hurt you. Because as a child, you don't have that kind of judgment or discernment. You don't get judgment or discernment of what you perceive until your 13th and on birthday. That's when it comes through your prefrontal cortex. So people are trying to change your judgments about how you think without addressing that it's fucking concrete. Like it's been in concrete since you were like 3, like that system's been there. And you think if you just change your mind, that system that was built to protect you, it was the body's natural response to danger, this is dangerous, I'm going to be hurt. And we don't know how. So when people want a trauma score, could have been something as subtle, not now, honey, I'm busy, go talk to your mother. How many parents have said that, trying to hurt the child, but the child starts to internalize, oh, you don't want to talk to me right now? Well, maybe I'm not here to be loved. So what happens is it starts to erode within how the child perceives things. So the next time they come to their parent as well, and they're like, not now, I'm busy, go see your mother. How many times does that happen? So the child slowly starts to shut down. And then the child starts to separate themselves. Well, I'll never tell him what I really like to do. I'll tell mom, but I'll never tell him. And so what the child starts to do is they start to separate. I'll show up as a good girl. If I'm quiet and I'm sitting here, then I'll be loved. So now they start to wire into their brain that how they act, how they behave, how they think will get them love. And that is actually what is the most tragedy of all of this, is that now we're saying just change how you think and you'll reach your purpose. You'll be set free of pain. And I say, no, not until you address the emotional system that underpins it. So the thinking is underpinned by the emotional system. That's emotional fitness. It starts in the emotion and goes to the head, and then the head processes whether this is dangerous or not. So and this is where I want to say this, is that men that control the patriarch society have told us that cognitive behavioral therapy is useful, but not for everyone. And too much of it is still cognitive behavior. If I just change my behavior, I will be better. If I'm just exposed to my trauma, I'll get over my trauma. Love that one. I know I'm going to be so trauma informed. I'm going to take ayahuasca and have all these experiences to know every detail of my trauma so I can remember them, because we assume if we remember our trauma, we can heal our trauma. Again, because of the mind. We think if I just know all this information, no, all it does is make your brain spin more because you think more. So if you kind of think about all of that, what the neuroscientists are right about, and many of them, is that there is a concrete wiring in the brain, but it came and was formed out of pain in response to a primal wound. It was an automatic system that had to form. Now, here's the good news. The emotional system is what we need to address first. Like I'm like out of the head, like it's not helpful at this stage. It's not helpful. So we need to look at the emotional system. And this is where we really noticed that out of all of the symptoms in the world, there was two prevailing things that I felt made us human, and also two things that work together that really define our humanity. And those two things are what are injured, and injured before your 10th birthday. And it's an injury to the system. So in many cases, people are running around with a bum leg. And we're saying, just have better willpower. Run the marathon. Why can't you stop eating? Why can't you do these things? We shame them because that's a very male, masculine, just change how you think. If you think better, you'll do better. But like, I have an injury. Who cares? You go run that marathon. If you had an Achilles injury, no one would be like shaming you to death. Oh, you have an Achilles injury? Well, you run the marathon anyway. You're like, oh, you have Achilles injury? Did you see a surgeon? Yeah, I saw a surgeon. What are you going to do? I gotta get this fixed. Then I'm going to go here, and then I'm going to get this rehab, and then I'm going to run the marathon. You're like, high five, done. But what we do is we create all this mysticism around the emotional system, as it's just this so far out there thing that no one can understand unless you see a specialist. So now coming back to the business model. So that for me was really having to traverse the last 30 years through all of this to say, well, where does this get broken? Like, when does this break down? And why does everybody relapse? And then this comes down to, well, it's a disease. And then I'm like, but is it a disease? Is it truly a disease? Mm-hmm. And is that working for you to know that you have that disease? Does it help you? And that became sort of the fascinating journey of all these questions.
Oh my God, I just can't help thinking about the fitness industry and overweight people. And you have these people who are naturally slender and muscular. And yes, they work hard, but they've got some other wound that you can't see. And then overweight people have this is their wound. And you have these people who don't have that wound and blame those people for their.
It makes me crazy watching person after person go through rehab and addiction services and then spend their lifetime reinforcing at meetings. Hi, my name is Janice and I'm an alcoholic, over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. And like the second or third rule is like your shameful ways, your moral deficiencies. Like if you read the 10 steps, you'll cry and like, this is where Brene Brown gave us so much information around shame, which was like, people don't heal with shame. And so what we've told people is that, oh, someone who's overweight, oh, by the way, you must have a problem with willpower. Like you just can't stop yourself from going to the fridge. You know, that's what we do. We shame them.
Horrible.
And we shame people that choose alcohol. It's no different than someone who chooses food, who chooses sex, who chooses work, who chooses vaping, who chooses social media. And so when you kind of look at this whole array of symptomology, because I call that symptomology, well, what do they all have in common? So after I'd looked through all these theories saying, well, what does the philosopher Descartes say, similar to Maslow? Like if the two of them sat together, would they agree? If Jesus sat with Muhammad and they had a conversation, what would they say? Like I wanted to know, what are we all saying, albeit differently, so we could find a commonality in our humanity, as well as also to say, well, what makes us human? That really was the ultimate question that seemed that no one could agree. No one could agree. And I was like, well, for F's sakes, like, Can we all agree we need oxygen? Yes. Okay, we can all agree that human beings require oxygen. Great. Okay, checkbox. And I literally went through the list of all the things that we as human beings could agree on that makes us human. And in our physical bodies, we can all basically agree to the basic symptoms and systems that govern our physical body. Like, we will die without a pancreas. We need one. Check. Guess we don't need an appendix. Gone. So I kind of went through this checklist, and then I moved to the brain, and then I moved to emotion. And that's how I was able to narrow down the two injuries that made us human that animals don't have. So I had to start at the core of all of this cluster, which is at behavior conditioning, and said in behavior psychology, if we looked at what Pavlov and B.F. Skinner did, they were looking at the nature and if they could condition an operant conditioned a behavior, a response. And so they did those experiments on dogs. And I thought, well, what makes us different than dogs? And that's where I had to start in my narrowing down of what makes us different than dogs. And so I literally started there to say, could we all agree at this basic level of understanding ourselves and humanity different than dogs? Because it isn't saying that we have a soul, because people would argue dogs have souls. So dogs have souls. Okay, dogs have souls. So then I was like, well, that's not going to help in our information. And I literally had to say, where's the first step in our humanity that is different than dogs? And I couldn't include religion because people disagree with the roots of the religion. So I was like, okay, well, they disagree there. So next. So I had to just keep going through this whole process and getting down to the core root, so that I could then say, okay, if this is the core root of what makes us human, what happened to it? What happened to our core root? Did it change? Has it fundamentally changed? And that's how I was able to narrow it down, right down to this is our emotional system. And when it's in haywire or when it's injured, it causes all of these symptoms. Yeah. That's the root cause, not the fact that my dad gets rip-roaring drunk. Now, does it contribute to it? Yes, but it contributes to the injury. It isn't the cause.
Well, it's interesting because having looked at all these women in perimenopause and menopause and my own experience, what happened to me in my 40s, I'm now so sure that when you hit this midlife heroine's journey, that this is what you're being called to heal. And obviously men go through it too. But I believe that when you refuse to look at this, that this is part of the reason people suffer so badly in perimenopause. And it's very, very controversial because then you're kind of saying, well, it's all in your head. No, but they're always talking around it. Women who have more stress have worse menopause symptoms. Women who grew up in poor socioeconomic conditions, racial weathering, all of these things contribute to the transition being more difficult. So how is it not all about this?
So glad you said that. It is, because this is how I see it, because I'm 50, so I'm in it, right? Okay, so there are two things that are God-given, however you define God. I'll just caveat it there. God-given, that women have the opportunity to rise from. And it's women who have this God-given privilege and right and choice. That is, if you are a woman in the world, you will experience a version of this. So that is like, and I'd be like, wow, what a uniting force amongst all of us. Like it's like, holy crap, we are really loved. That's how I view it. So one is, we as only in society, this is how it separates us, have the opportunity to have children. So the birthing of the child happens inside of our bodies. Yes, we need men to participate to a certain degree, but otherwise we are the bearers of children in the world. What an extraordinary honor and obligation that is not for everyone, and not everyone should be a mother if they don't want to be a mother. That's not what I'm saying, but there's that. Then there is one that is absolute universal, which means we don't choose it, it chooses us. So having children is still a choice that a woman can make. And I believe in that. But there is one thing we don't choose universally that happens to us, perimenopause. It is the one thing that we do not choose, And it happens to all of us to different degrees, but we do not choose it. It happens to us because it's a natural order of things. However, it also is the one opportunity that rouses the emotional system more than anything in the world. And it rouses the emotional system because if women can heal this emotional system collectively together, holy F, do we change the world? Holy F, do we unite the world? Holy F, all this patriarch masculine energy in the world today globally that is wreaking havoc on countries, that is taking, that is unforgiving, that is showing low emotional intelligence, that is just all hammerhead. Then we have put everybody inside of a digital machine, which we didn't even talk about my analysis of that, but that digital machine, behavior conditioning conditions a human away from their true self. So we need to understand that because we do become like animals, not more human. Coming back down to what makes us different than dogs. But if you put humans inside of a behavior Pavlovian experiment globally, 5.8 billion people spend 6.5 hours a day inside of a behavior conditioning machine. That is a lot of masculine energy. That is a lot of people turning away from themselves. That is a lot of a cluster F. However, here's the hope. Perimenopausal women the world over, regardless of your race or religion, regardless of your socioeconomic status, remember we'll have varying degrees of everything, we all collectively will go through this in some way, shape, or form. And because of that, what a powerful group we are, that it was given to us. It's not a curse, it's an awakening. It's an awakening to what is true. It is awakening to a fire of our give zero Fs parts of our journey, where we stop people pleasing and we move away from the emotional system that is injured. We have an opportunity to heal the emotional injury, but not just for ourselves, but for our children, for our peers, for our world, for our earth. We have this amazing gift. And I will argue this is why God loves women more. So I say he loves us more. Okay? He loves us more. So I will say we are loved more. Regardless of the I'm like, you really like us because we give it. It's not that men go through changes, but their default mechanism is to do more things with their head, make more money. I'll get a better car. I'll get a younger wife. They do lots of things to make themselves feel better in their head. And they convince themselves that they are emotionally healing because they're able to master their head. That is not how women are. We're like, this head, this stinking thinking isn't working. I have brain fog. Think about brain fog. Wow, we can't use our head to the same degree. So we're forced to look at the other systems that are superpowers. So what a change in a narrative for us to collectively embrace this season of our life as the greatest opportunity. And I believe it is right now with women like yourself and other women in the perimenopausal communities that are bringing awareness and conversation to it to see this as our superpower, but they may not connect it to the superpower of healing the emotional system because it's energy and attraction, right? Because if women heal this emotional system, perimenopausal women are the first to really dive into emotional fitness and really dive into heal this. It has spreads. It just spreads. That spread, cataclysmic spread, changes everything. And this is where I am so freaking excited about bringing, women together to do this.
Okay, this is going to be controversial. I support every woman's right to have hormone therapy and access to hormone therapy. But I sometimes think that this narrative that hormone therapy must be taken is a sort of a patriarchal construct that is held over from the early times. So I just want to, if anyone's listening and they're like, oh, I want you to have hormone therapy to get through it. But there is this narrative that hormone therapy will fix it, and not only fix it, it's necessary because it's a mistake. It's an accident and you're left vulnerable and exposed. And that, I don't know, I just feel like that's really, when you're talking about what you're talking about, I think that's why it rubs me the wrong way so much. It's also perpetuated by women. And I just wonder sometimes if it's perpetuated by women who aren't exploring their own primal wound.
Such a good question. And so glad that you said this because, okay, this is the best way to describe it. If some people will still require medication if they have OCD, still doesn't preclude you from doing the emotional work. So even if you require a drug because of that, it doesn't preclude you from still doing the emotional work. So HRT is as far as I'm concerned, and I take it. So I'm a proponent of it. I'm a proponent of it for me as something that just was a catalyst for me to calm certain things that I wanted it to, but it didn't preclude me from still doing the emotional work. And I still have an observation with it. So, and when I say an observation with it, it may or may not be what I actually needed after all. So it's a question that I have about it. The thing that we need to understand about the emotional system once it's healed, things in life become about choices, not things we have to do, not silver bullets that change our life. Every woman that's, and it's not to pick on men, but we get married and we think that this suddenly makes us valued because someone wants to marry us. And then 20 years later, you're like, I don't even like him. Like, I don't even like, and then you start to go, oh, well, maybe it wasn't so good for me. So what we have to do as women is suspend this concept of something giving something power outside of the self. So that is a symptom of an injured emotional system. An injured emotional system still thinks it's something outside of the self that's going to save them from themselves. So whether it's a guru, whether it's the latest yoga, whether it's red light therapy, whether it's a facelift, whatever it is, the moment you give something power outside of the self, you are in your emotional injury. That is the mic drop. If you give anything power outside of the self that you believe gives you an identity, love, belonging, a sense of self, anything, you are susceptible to the ego and susceptible to more emotional pain. You are actually attracting more emotional pain because you've given power to something outside of the self. That is the difference. Now, in a choice-based decision, when you have a healed emotional system, you make choices, not because of desperation and addiction, not because you think you need it, because it's a choice that you're choosing to make, period. So I choose to take HRT. Period. I don't need an explanation. It doesn't have power. It's not a justification. It's not a why. It is a thing I do.
You don't need to argue about it and defend it and say that everyone should be doing it.
It's a choice I make. However, I also have a healed emotional system because I also do other fabulous things with my hair, and I quite do this, and I take everything to the edge because I choose to do that. But I'm choosing it that if it's not there, does it make me less than? So the question we always have to be asking in the emotional maintenance of our system is, have I given anything power outside of myself? That is my daily thought.
I love it.
And the moment I say yes, I'll be like, why? Okay, there's the injury. The injury showed up here. If the injury showed up there, whatever it is that you believe has power, that is connected to your primal wound. And there are 3 main pain motivations that everybody has, regardless of where you are in the world. 3 that drive every single one of your decisions in your primal wound. So you have 2 emotional injuries to the system, and they spit out 3 symptoms of motivation. The first one is, I feel worthy of love. So when we give power to something outside of ourselves, one of our primal wounds is that we believe it will make us worthy. The second one is, will I feel powerful? So the second primal wound of the primal wound of the pain is we do something outside of ourselves under the illusion it will make us feel powerful. We think that something outside of ourselves will give us power. The third is abandoned. So if we have an abandonment wound, if I stay in this relationship, I am no longer abandoned. So now I may choose to be in relationships that I think are no longer, that will make me feel worthy, that will make me feel loved, will make me feel powerful, will make me feel not abandoned. And so what happens is the moment I give one thing, one crack, this is like the breadcrumbing of the emotionally unavailable man, is the moment I give him a crack, everything else can seep in. The moment you give a crack to a narcissist, they'll slither in. They need a crack in the manifold, because then that means there's still parts of you that's leaking. It's a leaky bucket.
Financial advisors, even
gurus on TV,
people who want to piggyback on your business for nefarious reasons.
Social media, oh, she must have power. Facebook, oh, Instagram. Well, if I don't have a social media platform, I'll never get customers. Power outside of the self.
Yeah.
It's not true. Could you go door to door? Sure. Do you want to? No. Would you rather sit on your couch and post? Sure. So we have to be honest. And so part of the emotional system is having radical accountability of the self. And so that means that in every situation, we have to have radical accountability of the self. And so coming back down to the HRT question is that if you've given it power, then you need to examine what power you've given it. Now, for other women, we can't shame them for different choices, because when people are in their emotional pain, they shame and blame each other. And that is the weapons of
Yes, this is the
emotional
fight.
pain.
This is the
This
fight.
is
You
the
don't
fight.
have to
It's
choose
unnecessary.
anything. You don't have to choose any
No.
way. It's all
No.
the ways. It's whatever. This is what
It means
seems
that
so
you're really not comfortable with your choice.
right.
And if you're not comfortable with your choice, then you need to ask yourself, why are you not comfortable with your choice? Because it's a choice.
Yeah.
So that is the better question. If you feel you need to defend defense mechanisms, defend, protect, convince others, that means you're not comfortable being alone, abandonment, with the choice that you make. That means you have a power outside of the self. And so this is what women are doing to each other in unhealed ways that my life's mission is to conquer. Unhealed women hurt each other far more than we will ever do to the male counterparts. Unhealed women who do not take radical accountability of the self have an intuitive way to hurt us far more in our superpower than a man's cognitive will ever do to us. Our intuitive spidey senses, our superpower turned against our fellow sisters and women, is the most destructive force in the world because it's potent. And we see this with little girls, and we see the perpetuation of this in movies. We see this in the perpetuation of shows of The Bachelor fighting over one dude where the women are hurting each other. We see this in all of the Real Housewives shows. We see this in constant perpetuity. And you look behind the scenes and you see who's the puppet behind all of that. It's often men. And it's often men who turn women against other women. And so when women do not do this emotional work, we are of no use to the world. Just gonna say it.
Shivers.
Women have got to do this emotional work if we genuinely want the world to change and we genuinely want a better future for ourselves and our children. Emotional pain is what is driving the global world. And we need to heal this emotional injury so it can actually permeate. Because as long as we shame and blame each other for the choices we make, we're divided. And HRT is a war zone right now. And you don't think that there's some men sitting in some back room going, keep fighting, ladies, keep fighting.
1,000%. That's what I think. 1,000%. I imagine these conversations. And then I don't know that the women who are having the conversations and being that way even understand. And I'm not saying they're not intelligent, deeply intelligent. I'm saying they're just not aware of their own pain. Like you've put the words to it. And when I even have doctors that, if I say something about hormone therapy that's not glowing, or if I say, there's this study or whatever, and I get like nastiness back, and you're right that it's piercing. It's awfully upsetting. Like I'm getting much more, I'm getting much better with it now. I'm getting more fit, but it was so deeply destabilizing to have it. And you're kind of giving it some words. Yeah. It's
because, emotional pain is irrational as much as it is also diluted, as much as it's also just deeply, deeply painful because it hits at your primal wound. This is how it's a slippery little sucker because it has its own intuitive sense in some ways, our emotional system. So if you have an emotional system and I have an emotional system, they're having a conversation before our head knows. And so what permeates out of my emotional system to you can be equally just as cutting in an injured way as it could be also just an energy that comes fully healed. And so when women tear each other apart, the world weeps. And that for me is what I watch time and time and time again. And this is why you have a lot of women that will stop being friends with other women and move away from it, because you realize that when we move into the masculine energies of our egoic cognitive ways, we move into this block where it's just blocks hitting each other. My cement block's hitting your cement block and we're getting nowhere. And I will say that part of the behavior conditioning, which comes down to this behavior conditioning wheel, is women have been conditioned historically to fight amongst each other. We have been told that there's no good men. So once you get one, hold on to them. We've been told and conditioned that the world is finite, that our beauty is finite, that our attractiveness is finite. We have been conditioned to believe that there's scarcity so that women go into power they're like, oh, I'm the only woman at the top. I'm not going to support my fellow sisters coming up. We believe it's finite. We believe it's finite. That is all cognitive behavior conditioning, that the world is finite. And women have tried to play in this system designed for a cognitive behavior thinking machine. And it doesn't work for us because we are naturally connected to something bigger than ourselves, and we're connected to this system, and we're connected to this. So perimenopausal women, I believe, is the world's call. It's the world's call. It is the call of the world for us to heal this emotional system so that we can unite in our healed selves, not our best selves, our healed selves, because it can be healed, so that that energy permeates and that there's nothing for you to do other than to heal and be radically accountable for the feelings that you have, because that has its own vibrational force and that has its own energy fields. So when women are tearing other women down, it serves no one. And every time that happens, another man in a back room, in some ways, the masculine, they have pom-poms because they're excited for that. And that is the design of a patriarch system. And you'll see this even more so when you start separating women by our race and our religion and our color. And as soon as that starts happening, now we've got dual forces going on. We've got cultural trauma, we've got generational trauma, we have race trauma, we have gender trauma, we have all this trauma. And in the meantime, we have this rise. So people are asking, why do we have this rise of this really heavily masculine world? And then we have women trying so hard to be these masculine badass things. And I'm like, it's just so counterintuitive to what you are. And then you see them tearing each other apart. And so there's nothing worse than seeing this happen in society. But I call this the ring of fire around the patriarch society, is the women who are enabling it to continue. And the enablement around that side of it is women who have not done their work, who still believe in the power outside of themselves. So they're still giving power to something outside of the self. And as long as women give power to something outside of the self, she is operating from her pain point.
Okay, so you have a way forward through all this. What does it involve? How does it work?
So you can think about the emotional system just like if you were to like wake up one day and say, hey, I think I want to get in shape, and you hire a trainer. And so like you can kind of think about it in this simpler terms. When you hire a trainer, they probably give you lots of knowledge as to how your body works, how it moves, and then you go and practice the system. It's like walking's for me, don't like the strider, definitely don't like kettlebells, like the machines. You start to decipher what works for you and what food you eat and how you move. So we designed a system for 6 months. That system is a 6-month program that heals the emotional injury. It is very formulaic, it's very structured, and at the same time, you get all the knowledge as to how your emotional system works. So we have a theory class. So you literally learn the theory, and you are the student of that theory, and you put yourself through the same paces of that. When we talk about the emotional injury, this program is designed to heal the underpinning of your emotional system. So that underpinning of your emotional system is we concentrate on 2 emotional injuries that we believe everybody has. It is a very focused program. Now you can do this on your own in a self-directed way. Some people like to hire a coach and a trainer, but you don't need a coach for years. You don't have a fitness trainer for years unless you have a formed dependency on that trainer, which means you're still giving them power outside of the self, and you don't want to work out by yourself. So you're using them to continue your journey with fitness versus owning it for yourself. We look at emotional system the same way. So we do 6 months to heal the emotional injury and then 6 months of maintenance. And if you have not fired a coach or a therapist after 12 months because you've been able to absorb all the knowledge, then you formed a dependency. So you really should not need us after that. Now you can maintain your emotional fitness no different than you maintain your physical fitness. It becomes part of how I call it the bookends of your day. You start your day in your emotional system and you end your day in your emotional system. And so you can think about it in the same way. You don't do physical fitness all day long to maintain your physical fitness, but you're aware of it. What you eat through the day, when you have lunch, if you choose to eat different at dinner, that's you just living. Emotional system is very much the same way. The difference is we're not connected to it. We're not aware of it. We think it's this very fairy thing out there that doesn't exist, and we haven't optimized it. So we haven't taken our emotional system intentionally out into the world to strengthen. We haven't done any squats with it. We haven't, like, literally the first time you do a squat and you go to the toilet the next day, never fun. But you keep doing the squats because you want a great ass. Like that's what you've decided as a choice for you. So you can think about the emotional system as first you need to understand it. So you need to understand how it works. Once you understand it in the most simplest way possible, then you can understand your emotional injury. Then you move through the steps. And this is where I decided to build it on the hero's journey so that it could be a story arc, so that people could see that their life could unfold in a very beautiful, extraordinary way. I wanted them to take the adventure of the self. The adventure of the self, there's no greater adventure than for you to dive into the depths of who you are, not so that you could look at your trauma every day and twice on Sunday. It's so that you could see all your magic. So you could see all your gold that you buried for yourself, because that's how much you loved yourself. At one point, you loved yourself without question. You did not think you needed to negotiate love. You didn't think you needed to negotiate being worthy. A baby doesn't say, is it okay if I cry right now because my pants are full? The baby doesn't negotiate. They have an expectation to be loved because that's what's in their true self. Babies teach us everything we want to know about our true self. They don't negotiate it. They smile when it's funny. They don't apologize when they crap their pants. And so, if you think about it in that way, the emotional system is a system we just don't understand. And we've been separated from it far too long. And we've been separated with over-intellectualizing. We've been separated from superiority. We've been separated from it because of a business model. We've been separated it from a lack of education understanding. We've been separated from it because of a patriarch society. They didn't intentionally say you're never going to know your emotional system. They just denied its existence, just like they denied the existence of women for a very long time, just like they continue to deny the existence of people of color or of different religions or anything that doesn't fit in that judgment of their prefrontal cortex, they will reject. Anything that doesn't fit that box, they will reject. So that is crazy when you think about it, but pretty simple when you think about it. So we can stop having the debates of why don't you care about women's rights, for example? Well, it doesn't fit in their box. And we want them to. It would be great if they did. But you're asking something of someone who's injured. He doesn't have an awareness of his emotional system, so he's living out of his box. And so what do women do? We hammer at the box even more. And then we go, well, why doesn't he understand? Well, you're ramming his head, that's a cement wall, into a cement wall. Like, it's not going to work. So, but what you have to do is you have to maneuver around the box. And so it's the maneuvering around the box that is necessary, because we're fighting a knowledge war. And this is where I see this in HRT, is we're having the wrong discussion.
Yeah.
Because for some people it's like great, other people it's not. And there's like mixed bags of all this knowledge. So we just keep fighting knowledge, right?
Oh, it's insane. There's even people arguing that their route of hormone therapy is the best route of hormone therapy, and the other route is
ridiculous.
Just, yeah, it's ridiculous.
And I spent a lot of time researching because first of all, there's so many beautiful women making amazing recipes. I just want to tell all the love to the book talkers for the smut books I now read because of Book Talk. And which really was like amazing for my libido. Talk about a natural libido is like read smut books for a while.
We've always loved reading. Women love reading. My boyfriend used to give me the penthouse letters when I was a teenager, and I was like, I love these. Yeah, we love reading.
The 20-something in Book Talk have taught me a whole new way to read. The second thing is like there's all these amazing women with recipes, but then you get into the real sort of meat and potatoes, and this is where again you're trying to separate out like what's my choice? And what do I choose to do? And why am I doing it? And being connected to the emotional system so that you understand if you're giving it any power. And so that's the better question. If I do X, Y, and Z, am I giving it power to something outside of myself? And if there's a little part of you that's saying yes, then that's probably the part of yourself that you need to love the most. And that's probably tells us where your emotional injury is. And that's telling us that that part of your system has a bum leg. So before you choose it, do the work and then decide if it's for you. So then you make a choice. I didn't start HRT until I was 49. And I'm in it for now. for now. And I did it for certain reasons and choices. And I'm really grateful that I did. I'm really happy that I did. But it doesn't have any other power than me being grateful that I did.
That's great.
And so then it's the end of the story, right? Do I think other women should do it? I think other women should heal their emotional injury first before they make a decision about anything.
I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. It's sort of screaming. And if you've done it, you just want everyone to do it because life is so much lighter. And lighter. Yeah, it's lighter. It's easier.
It's the same with relationships. My marriage ended and someone said to me, well, did you fight? And I'm like, no, he made a choice. And they're like, what do you mean he made a choice? I go, he made a choice to end our marriage. And I chose to accept his choice. And so now I carry on. They're like, that's cold. I said, is it? I said, it's the most loving thing that someone can do is to accept a choice that someone has made. And
so
to
much
know that it's the most loving thing you can do.
Yeah. I mean, I've never gotten married, but I've listened to so many people have breakups and I've had breakups and so much of the discourse, and I remember listening to myself and I hear it in people now, is just arguing with the person's choice to end it, right? And then you just have to create all of this noise around it because it's people always get mad at how people break up with them. Like in the dating world, they're always so mad at how, and it's like, I've never heard one person say he broke up with me in the best way possible.
Yeah. And again, it hits the primal wound of abandonment and worthiness, right? So what I had to address was, okay, what is my side of the street in this relationship? Do I choose to heal that? What did it give me in the gift? Can I say goodbye to it? Can I wish it well? Can I grieve? And none of that involves him. None of that involves him. There wasn't anything that he needed to participate in after the fact.
Right.
And so that was where I needed to examine. I needed to do the healing. I needed to love on myself. I needed to look at all those things. And there was nothing that he could give because there was no power there. He has no power to give me. And so when you commit, and this is what I really want women to know if they're listening to this, is I want them to commit to examining all aspects of their life where they may have leaky buckets, where they've given something power outside of themselves. And if they do that examination, that's the start of emotional fitness. That's really the start.
And if people want to get more involved, what do they do?
Yeah, so if we want to get more involved, they can come to Wilson 4Q. I do have select emotional fitness coaches that have taken my course. I've trained them myself to work with people in a short amount of period of time. So if they want to do this work for themselves, they can come there. They can work with one of our coaches. If they want to become an emotional fitness coach just for perimenopausal women, they can also shoot us an email there at Wilson 4Q, because if they come there and they choose to work with this, all of our coaches work in specific niches. So it's emotional fitness for X. So I have emotional fitness for men's health, emotional fitness for teens, and we have emotional fitness for perimenopause. So your target group of women that you will be working with, or people that you'll be working with, if this is an area of passion for you, is just in perimenopause. So that is how we organize our world of coaches. I have very, very few, because I really want the high quality and you can work directly with a coach. I still take on the occasional person to work with, but for the most part, we have all of our emotional fitness coaches. Francis is leading that vertical, so you can come there and find out about that. And we're also going to be having a retreat in the spring.
Sure.
So we could do the spring. Right, Miss Anne-Marie? Are we hosting a retreat?
I think that we're hosting a retreat.
We are hosting a retreat.
It's
so
pretty
those
exciting.
details are going to be released soon.
Yeah.
So Anne-Marie and I are hosting this retreat. And I'm really excited to bring women together and to share and to be empowered and to leave feeling like they're ready to conquer the world. That's the whole point of it. And when we say conquer the world, whatever world you're living in, of course. So, that's going to be, so fun.
Okay, so when you're listening to the podcast, check the show notes. I'll be sharing information on how to get it.
Hotflash Inc. was created and is hosted by Anne-Marie McQueen, produced and edited by Sonia Mack. The information contained in this podcast is intended for informational purposes only and is not intended for the purpose of diagnosing, treating, curing, or preventing any disease. Before using any products referenced on the podcast, consult with your healthcare provider, read all labels, and heed all directions and cautions that accompany the products. Information received through the podcast should not be used in place of a consultation or advice from a healthcare provider. If you suspect you have a medical problem, i.e. menopause or anything else, or any healthcare questions, please promptly see your healthcare provider. This podcast, including Anne-Marie McQueen and any producers or editors, disclaim any responsibility from any possible adverse effects from the use of any information contained herein. Opinions of guests on this podcast are their own, and the podcast does not endorse or accept responsibility for statements made by guests. This podcast does not make any representations or warranties about a guest's qualifications or credibility. This podcast may contain paid endorsements and advertisements for products or services. Individuals on this podcast may have direct or indirect financial interest in products or services referred to herein. This podcast is owned by Hotflash Inc. Media.